Sarah Malik had been working at Harrington Digital for 2 years. She was 28 years old with dark brown hair she kept in a loose bun most days. Wire-rimmed glasses she pushed up her nose when she was thinking hard. And a habit of staying late at the office when a project grabbed her attention. She was a graphic designer. A good one. The kind who got lost inside color palettes and font choices the way other people got lost inside good novels. She was not the kind of person who talked much in elevators. She preferred the stairs, actually. But tonight her laptop bag was heavy, she had her coffee thermos in one hand. And she was running on 4 hours of sleep because she had spent the previous night finishing a logo redesign for a client who kept changing his mind. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. The stairs felt like a mountain. So she pressed the elevator button on the 7th floor and waited. The building was mostly empty by now. It was nearly 8 in the evening. The cleaning crew had already come and gone on the lower floors. The hallway lights were on their dim evening setting, that slightly yellow glow that made everything feel a little lonelier than it actually was. Sarah leaned against the wall and checked her phone. Her sister had texted twice. Her mother had texted once. There was an email from the client, the one who kept changing his mind, and she chose not to open it. Not tonight. Tonight she was going home. She was going to eat the leftover biryani in her fridge. She was going to sit on her couch with her cat Mango. And she was going to watch something completely mindless on television. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Sarah stepped inside without looking. Up from her phone. She almost walked directly into the woman already standing there. Oh, sorry. No. My fault. They both stepped back. Sarah looked up. The woman standing in the elevator was someone Sarah had seen before. She was sure of it, but had never actually spoken to. She worked on a different floor. The 9th floor, maybe, or the 10th. Sarah had seen her in the lobby a few times, in the coffee line downstairs once. She was tall. She had natural hair, a beautiful crown of tight coils, and she was wearing a dark green blazer over a white shirt. The blazer slightly rumpled the way clothes get rumpled after a long day. She had the kind of face that was serious at rest, but looked like it could break into something warm very easily. If given a reason, she was carrying a plant, a small potted plant, the kind with broad green leaves, held against her side like it was something precious. Sarah blinked at the plant. The woman noticed Sarah noticing the plant. "It's a peace lily," she said, with a slight defensive note in her voice, as if she expected to be made fun of. "I wasn't going to say anything," Sarah said. "You were looking at it. It's a nice plant." The woman looked at the plant, then back at Sarah. Something in her expression softened just slightly. "Her name is Dorothy." Sarah almost smiled. "You named your plant Dorothy, after Dorothy Dandridge." She shifted the plant against her hip. "Are you going down?" "Yeah, ground floor. Me too." Sarah stepped fully inside the elevator. The door slid closed behind her. She pressed the button for the ground floor even though it was already lit, because she always pressed it anyway out of habit. The elevator hummed and lurched downward. Then it stopped. Not a smooth stop. Not the gentle deceleration of a normal arrival at a floor. A sudden, jerky, grinding stop somewhere between the 7th floor and the 6th floor. And then the lights flickered twice and went to emergency mode dim. Slightly orange glow from the single strip of backup lighting near the ceiling. Both women stood very still for a moment. "Okay," Sarah said carefully. "Yeah," the woman with the plant said. Sarah pressed the ground floor button again. Nothing happened. She pressed it 3 more times. Nothing. She pressed the door open button. Nothing. She found the emergency call button, the one with the little bell symbol, and pressed it. It made a buzzing sound somewhere deep in the walls of the building. They waited. A tinny, distant voice came through the small speaker. "Harrington Building Security." "Hi," Sarah said, leaning toward the panel. "The elevator is stuck. We're between the 6th and 7th floor, I think." A pause. "Are you injured?" "No." "Okay, I'll contact the elevator maintenance company." "Might take a little while, it being after hours." "You have air in there, you're not in any danger. Just sit tight." Sarah straightened up. She looked at the woman beside her. The woman was looking at the ceiling of the elevator with an expression of very calm, very contained frustration. "Well," Sarah said. Well, the woman agreed. They stood there for another moment. The elevator was not large. It fit maybe 6 people comfortably. With 2 people, there was plenty of room, but the smallness of the space still made itself felt the low hum of the backup lighting, the faint smell of old metal and whatever cleaning product the crew used. The complete stillness of being suspended between floors with nowhere to go. Sarah sat down on the floor. Her bag was heavy and her feet hurt, and there was nothing else to do. She set the bag beside her, held onto her coffee thermos, and leaned her back against the wall. The woman with the plant watched her sit down, then carefully placed Dorothy in the corner of the elevator, making sure the pot was stable, and sat down across from her. They looked at each other. "I'm Zoe," the woman said. "Zoe Carter. I work on the 10th floor, marketing." "Sarah Malik, 7th floor, design. I've seen you in the lobby." "I've seen you too. You were in the coffee line one morning and you ordered something very complicated." Zoe looked briefly embarrassed. "A lavender oat milk latte with an extra shot and no foam and a sprinkle of cinnamon. The barista had to write it on her hand." Zoe laughed. It was a good laugh, surprised out of her, genuine, a little unwilling. "I have specific needs, I could tell." The elevator hummed around them. Somewhere above them or below them or in the walls, a pipe made a sound. They both glanced up at the same moment, then relaxed. "Have you ever been stuck in an elevator before?" Sarah asked. "Once. I was 12. It was in a mall and it lasted about 4 minutes and I cried." Zoe paused. "I was 12. That's completely reasonable. Are you afraid of enclosed spaces?" Sarah considered this. "Not really." "Are you?" "I thought I was, but actually I think I'm okay." Zoe tilted her head. "Ask me again in an hour." Sarah smiled. She leaned her head back against the wall. The orange emergency light made everything feel strange, like being inside a very small room at sunset, or like being in the developing room of an old photograph. Everything slightly warm, slightly unreal. She looked at Dorothy the peace lily in the corner. "Why do you bring a plant to work?" she asked. Zoe pulled her knees up slightly, getting comfortable. "Dorothy lives in my office. I take her home on weekends because the building gets cold on weekends when the heating goes off. Then I bring her back Monday. But this week I forgot. So she's been there since last Friday and I felt guilty. So tonight I was going to take her home a day early." Sarah looked at Zoe. "You felt guilty about your plant. She's good company. She doesn't judge you. She just grows toward the light." A pause. "There's something admirable about that." Sarah thought about that for a moment. She thought it was either the most calming thing she had ever heard someone say or the saddest, or both. She decided she wasn't sure yet. "What do you do in marketing?" she asked. "Brand strategy. I figure out how companies talk about themselves, what words they use, what feeling they want to give people." Zoe looked at her. "What kind of design do you do?" "Mostly visual identity. Logos, brand guidelines, that kind of thing." Zoe raised her eyebrows. "So you figure out how companies look, and you figure out how they sound. We're basically doing the same job, from different directions." Sarah said. Something settled between them after that, a comfortable kind of quiet. The kind that happens when 2 people realize they might actually be able to talk to each other. It was not awkward. It was just the silence of 2 people getting used to each other's presence. The way you get used to a new sound in a room. Sarah opened her thermos and drank some coffee. It was lukewarm by now, but she didn't mind. "Can I ask something personal?" Zoe said. Sarah looked at her. "Sure. Do you always stay this late?" "When a project has me..." "You? Not always. Tonight I had a presentation I was finishing. A pitch for a new client." A pause. "It went well, actually. The staying late paid off. Congratulations." Zoe smiled. It was the first full smile Sarah had seen from her, and it changed her face, completely warmed it, opened it up. Sarah noticed she had a small gap between her front teeth. For some reason, this detail felt important to notice, though Sarah could not have said why. "What about you?" Zoe asked. "Did your staying late pay off?" Sarah thought about the email sitting unread in her inbox. The client who kept changing his mind. "I think I need more time to tell." Zoe nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is a strange situation. Getting stuck in an elevator? Being stuck in a small space with someone you've seen 100 times but never spoken to. Zoe looked at her thoughtfully. In normal life, we might never have talked. We would have just kept being two people who recognized each other's faces. Sarah felt the truth of this. It was strange, wasn't it, all the people who moved through the edges of your life without ever stepping into the center of it? All the almost meetings, the near conversations, the people who stayed blurry when they could have been clear. What would have happened? Sarah said slowly, if you hadn't had Dorothy tonight? Zoe looked at her. If you hadn't felt guilty about leaving her there over the weekend, Sarah went on. You would have left earlier or later or taken the stairs, or you would have... Zoe said quietly. They looked at each other. Dorothy got us stuck in this elevator together. Sarah said. Zoe looked at the plant in the corner. Dorothy's broad green leaves caught the orange emergency light and held it. She looked almost dignified there in her corner, completely untroubled by the situation. I'm going to thank her, Zoe said. Sarah laughed. An hour passed. The maintenance company had been called. The security guard had told them over the speaker, but the after-hours team was coming from the other side of the city. It would be at least another hour, maybe 90 minutes. Were they okay? They were okay. Sarah had eaten the emergency granola bar from the bottom of her bag. She'd offered half to Zoe, who had accepted it with the serious gratitude of someone who had also skipped dinner. They had drunk the last of the lukewarm coffee from Sarah's thermos, passing it between them without making a big deal of it, which somehow felt like a small milestone. They had talked about work, about the building, about the strange micro-community that forms in an office, the people you know only by their lunch orders, the ones who claim the same corner of the break room every day, the territorial battles over the good printer on the 4th floor. Now they had moved, without particularly deciding to, into more personal territory. Where did you grow up? Sarah asked. She was sitting with her legs stretched out in front of her, her bag beside her, her glasses pushed up into her hair because, in this light, she didn't need them. Chicago, Zoe said. South Side, you? Lahore until I was 10. Then my family moved here. Sarah paused. I sometimes think in two cities at once. Like, there are two different versions of what normal looks like, and they don't always agree with each other. Zoe was quiet for a moment, considering this. What do they disagree about? Oh, a lot of things. How loud a family dinner should be. Whether it's normal to know your neighbors. What you owe the people who raised you versus what you owe yourself. A pause. Big stuff. Do you have a big family? Enormous. 3 sisters, 2 brothers. All of them very interested in each other's lives. Sarah smiled slightly. Yours? Just me and my mom. My dad left when I was 7. Zoe said it matter-of-factly, no drama in her voice, the way you talk about things you have made peace with. It was better after he left, actually. The house got quieter in a good way. That sounds like it took time to understand. It took until I was about 22. She picked at a thread on the knee of her trousers. My mom is amazing. She's a retired schoolteacher. She has very strong opinions about grammar and about the correct way to fold a fitted sheet. Nobody knows the correct way to fold a fitted sheet. My mother does. She's tried to teach me 4 times. I think she's given up. Zoe smiled. She calls me every Sunday at 10. Like clockwork. We talk for exactly 45 minutes because that's how long her walk takes. She calls you during her walk? She says it makes her walk feel more like a visit. Sarah found this so sweet she didn't know what to do with it for a moment. She just held it, the way you hold a small, warm thing. Do you like this city? Zoe asked. Or do you still feel like a visitor sometimes? Sarah thought about it honestly. I like it. I made it mine, I think. But there are moments, usually in October, when the light changes, when I miss Lahore so much it's almost physical. Like a weight. She looked at the emergency light above them. Do you know what I mean? Missing somewhere as a feeling in your body, not just your head? Yes, Zoe said, without hesitation. I feel that about Chicago. Specifically about one particular block in my neighborhood that had 3 trees that would turn completely yellow and fall. Like 3 torches. She paused. When I went back 2 years ago, they had all been cut down. Oh no, it was surprisingly devastating. She shook her head. I stood there on the sidewalk feeling completely ridiculous. That's not ridiculous at all. I know. But it felt ridiculous. She looked at Sarah. You're easy to talk to. The directness of it caught Sarah slightly off guard, not unpleasantly. Just in the way that honesty sometimes catches you when you're not braced for it. She felt something shift very slightly in the temperature of the conversation. Not warmer exactly. More alive, thank you, Sarah said. So are you. They were quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something else personal? Zoe said. You keep warning me before you ask. Is that annoying? No, I like it. Sarah adjusted her position against the wall, getting more comfortable. Go ahead, Zoe looked at her steadily. There was a directness to her gaze that Sarah had noticed from the start, not aggressive, just very present. The kind of person who actually looks at you when they're talking to you. Are you seeing anyone? The question landed quietly in the small space between them. Sarah held Zoe's gaze. No, you? No. A brief pause. I got out of a relationship about 8 months ago. I've been not exactly avoiding trying again, but not exactly rushing either. What happened, if you don't mind? We wanted different things. She wanted to move to a different city, start fresh somewhere. I didn't want to leave. A pause. Or maybe I just didn't want to leave for her. I'm still figuring out which one it was. Sarah heard the pronoun. She felt it register in her chest, a small, distinct awareness like a key turning somewhere. She kept her expression steady and calm. That's an honest thing to admit, she said. I try to be honest with myself. I'm not always successful, but I try. I got out of something about a year ago, Sarah said. We were together for almost 3 years. She was wonderful, actually, just the relationship had stopped growing. We were very comfortable with each other, and comfortable started to feel like settling. And I think we both knew it, and then one day we were brave enough to say it out loud. She folded her hands in her lap. It was the kindest breakup I've ever had, which somehow made it sadder. Zoe was quiet for a moment. The kindest breakup I've ever had was also the saddest, she said. There's something about a relationship that ends gently. It leaves a different kind of mark than a dramatic ending. Less anger, more wistfulness. Yes, Sarah said. Exactly that, wistfulness. The words sat between them. The elevator hummed. Dorothy stood in her corner. Were you out? Zoe asked. With your family, I mean. Pakistani family. Sarah exhaled slowly. Not at first. I was out to my friends by the time I was 20. My family, that took longer. My oldest sister figured it out before I told her. She asked me directly at a family dinner in front of everyone, which was absolutely terrifying. And I said yes, and she said, okay, and then she passed me the rice. Zoe stared at her. She just passed you the rice. She just passed me the rice. Like it was the most normal thing. Sarah smiled, and it was a complicated smile, love and relief and the memory of fear, all at once. She's my favorite person on earth. What about the rest of your family? My mother cried. Not in a bad way, she said she cried because she was worried about how hard the world would be for me, which is its own kind of love, even if it's a complicated kind. She paused. My father didn't say anything for 3 weeks, and then one Sunday he called me and said he'd been thinking, and he wanted me to know that I was his daughter, and that didn't change. Her voice was even. It wasn't a parade, but it was enough. That's real, Zoe said softly. Your mom? Sarah asked. My mom figured it out when I was 16 and left a book on my bed. A novel. It was a love story between 2 women. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. Then about 6 months later, I sat down and told her directly, and she said, I know, baby. I left that book on your bed so you'd know I was ready when you were. Sarah felt something catch in her throat. She left a book. She's a teacher. That's how she communicates love. Zoe's voice was soft. She's the best person I know. They were both quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that follows an exchange of something real, not comfortable. Exactly, not uncomfortable. But waited, important. We've known each other for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Sarah said. 1 hour and 20, Zoe said, checking her watch. And we've talked about our exes, our families, our childhoods, and our cities, and my plant, and your plant. Sarah smiled. What do you think that means? Zoe tilted her head. The emergency light caught the side of her face, made her look like something painted. I think it means, she said carefully, that we were probably overdue for this conversation. Another hour passed. The security guard checked in twice. The maintenance team was almost there, he said. Almost. Hold on, they were not afraid. They were, if anything, less eager to leave than they had been at the start. They had moved from sitting on opposite sides of the elevator to sitting side by side, backs against the same wall, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. It had happened gradually, the way two people drift toward each other in a quiet room, not planned. Barely noticed until it was already done. Zoe had taken off her blazer because the elevator, without its ventilation running properly, had gotten slightly warm. She had folded it carefully and set it beside Dorothy. Sarah had taken her hair down from its bun and it fell around her shoulders. Dark and slightly wavy, they were telling each other stories. The worst day I've ever been on, Zoe said. And Sarah had asked her, and she was absolutely delivering. Was a woman who spent 45 minutes explaining to me why astrology was actually a scientifically valid system. Was she an astrologer? She was an accountant. Sarah pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh. And then, Zoe continued, with the expression of someone recounting a great injustice, when the food arrived. She moved all her food to one side of the plate because she couldn't eat it if different foods were touching. Okay, that's not, and then she told me I seemed like a Scorpio. But in a bad way. Sarah could not hold it anymore. She laughed genuinely, freely, the kind of laugh that you can't stop once it starts. She leaned forward with it and then leaned back. And somehow when she leaned back, her shoulder was against Zoe's shoulder and she left it there without thinking about it. What does a Scorpio in a bad way even mean? She managed. I did not ask. I did not want to know. What sign are you actually? Capricorn. Zoe paused. And I only know that because of this experience. Sarah shook her head, still smiling. I'm a Virgo, just so you know. Is that good or bad? I have absolutely no idea. They were laughing together now in the small warm space of the elevator. And when the laughter faded, it left something behind, a looseness, an openness. The particular ease that only comes after shared laughter. Your turn, Zoe said. Worst date? Sarah considered. I once went on a date with a woman who was beautiful and funny, and we had a great time. And at the end of the night, she said she wanted to see me again. She paused. And then I found out she'd been on a date with my coworker the next night. At the same company? 3 desks away from me, Zoe winced. It wouldn't have been so bad except my coworker used to tell me about her dates at lunch, and she described the whole thing, and I had to sit there eating my sandwich. What did you do? I ate my sandwich. They looked at each other. And there was something in Zoe's expression, a deep appreciation. A recognition of something that made Sarah feel seen in a way she couldn't entirely explain. You're very calm, Zoe said. I've been told. I mean it as a compliment. You have this quality of steadiness. Like you know where you are. Sarah thought about this. I think I've spent a lot of energy trying to know where I am. It didn't come naturally. A pause. What about you? I used to be calmer than I am, Zoe said. I think this job made me more anxious. Marketing is a lot of performance. A lot of being the most confident person in the room even when you're not. She looked at her hands. I've been unlearning that. Trying to. Unlearning performance. Yeah. She glanced at Sarah. You're one of the first people I've said that to. The weight of the conversation had shifted again. From stories to something more tender, more exposed. Sarah was aware of the warmth of Zoe's shoulder against hers. She was aware of the smallness of the space. The strange quality of the emergency light. The oddness and rightness of this whole situation, 2 women on the floor of a stopped elevator, between floors. Between the world outside and wherever they were going. Tell me something about yourself that surprises people, Sarah said. Zoe thought for a moment. I cry at commercials. Not sad ones. Happy ones. If there's a reunion, like someone coming home from somewhere, I'm done. She said it with the resigned acceptance of someone who has made peace with this fact. I once cried at a commercial for paper towels. Because a grandmother was baking a pie with her grandkids and the light was nice. The light was nice. Sarah repeated. The cinematography was excellent. Sarah smiled. I play piano, she said. Badly, but passionately. I've been learning for 4 years and I can play approximately 11 songs. But I play them very enthusiastically. Do you play for people? Only myself. And sometimes Mango. Mango? My cat. She sits on the piano bench beside me and either listens or bats at the keys. Depends on her mood. Zoe looked delighted by this. She plays too. She's more avant-garde than I am. What's your best song? Sarah didn't hesitate. Claire de Lune, it took me 18 months to get through it without stopping. The first time I played it all the way through, I cried. She paused. So maybe we're both criers. Zoe's smile was soft. Maybe we are. They were quiet again. But it was the deepest quiet, yet the kind of silence that feels inhabited, that has texture and warmth. Sarah was aware, in a way she couldn't ignore and didn't want to, of how close they were sitting. Of how naturally this had happened. Of how much she already felt in the space of 2 hours, like she knew this person. Or was beginning to know her. Or wanted to. Zoe, she said. Yeah? Can I ask you something direct? Zoe turned her head. Their faces were quite close. You keep asking permission, she said. You don't need to. Okay, Sarah met her eyes. Do you feel this too? Zoe held her gaze for a long moment. The emergency light glowed above them. Dorothy stood steady in her corner. Yes, Zoe said simply. Sarah exhaled. I noticed you, Zoe said quietly. Before tonight. I told myself it was just, you know how you notice a person? And tell yourself it's nothing? She paused. I've been telling myself it was nothing for about 6 months. 6 months, Sarah said. Since April, you were in the lobby eating a peach. She looked almost embarrassed. You had this look on your face like the peach was the best thing that had ever happened to you. And I thought, I want to know that person. Sarah stared at her. She remembered that peach. She had bought it from the cart outside and it had been, genuinely extraordinary, the kind of ripe, sweet, perfect fruit that felt like a gift. She remembered standing in the lobby eating it and thinking that some days gave you exactly what you needed. I didn't see you, Sarah said. You were very focused on the peach. Sarah laughed. And Zoe laughed, and when the laughter settled, they were still looking at each other. And something had been said now that couldn't be unsaid. And neither of them wanted to unsay it. I've seen you since then, Sarah said. I noticed you. I think I was noticing you and not letting myself know I was noticing you. What does that mean? It means I would see you in the lobby and something would happen that I didn't name. She was being careful, precise, the way she was with words when they mattered. I would feel more awake. More present. Zoe was quiet for a moment. Then she said very softly, yeah. Yeah, Sarah agreed. They sat there together in the warm orange light of the stopped elevator. And somewhere in the walls the building breathed around them. And Dorothy stood in her corner growing toward whatever light she could find when the maintenance crew arrived. It was nearly 11 o'clock. There was a process tool's sounds from below the elevator. A long moment where the lights flickered and both Sarah and Zoe instinctively reached for each other's arm. And then a slow, grinding, careful descent to the ground floor. The doors opened. The lobby outside was bred after the orange emergency world they had been living in. And both women stood up slowly, stretching. Stepping out into the light, a security guard and 2 maintenance workers stood there, looking relieved. You folks okay? Fine, Zoe said. We're fine. Sorry about that. The cable system we've been telling management. It's okay, Sarah said. She was blinking in the brightness. She felt strange. Not in a bad way. More like she'd been somewhere very far away and had come back. And everything in the lobby was the same, as it had always been, but she was not quite the same. Zoe was gathering Dorothy from the elevator, tucking the plant against her side. She turned and found Sarah looking at her dot. They stood there for a moment while the maintenance workers talked to each other and the security guard filled out a form on his clipboard. Well, Zoe said. Well, Sarah said. I should. Zoe gestured vaguely at the door, at the world outside. Right, neither of them moved. Zoe shifted Dorothy to her other arm. Do you want? She paused. She seemed to be deciding something. Sarah watched her decide it. I was going to say, do you want to get a drink? But it's almost 11 and you probably, yes, Sarah said. Zoe stopped. Yes, Sarah said again, more simply. I want to get a drink, Zoe smiled. It was the full smile again, the one with the gap between the front teeth, the one that changed her whole face. There's a place 2 blocks from here that's open late. I know the one. Sarah picked up her bag. Should we tell Dorothy she's being taken out on a school night? Zoe looked at the plant. She'd be fine. She's very adaptable. They walked out of the Harrington building together into the October night. The air was cold after the warmth of the elevator, clean and sharp, smelling of rain that had fallen earlier in the evening while they were inside. The street was mostly quiet. The lights of the city spread out around them, and above the buildings there was a partial moon, and the wet pavement reflected everything back doubled. Sarah put her bag on her shoulder. Zoe held Dorothy. They walked side by side. Do you want to know something? Zoe said. Always. I had been dreading tonight. I was tired and the presentation had been stressful and I just wanted to go home. She looked at the street ahead of them. I was even annoyed at Dorothy for making me stay late. And now Zoe glanced at her. The moonlight and the streetlight made her face silver and warm at the same time. Now I think tonight might be one of the best nights I've had in a long time. Sarah felt this in her chest, a deep, quiet expansion, like a room whose walls had moved back. Me too, she said. The bar was called, informally, because its actual sign had burned out 2 years ago and the owner had never replaced it. The corner place, everyone in the neighborhood just called it that. It had a dark wood bar and low lighting and booths along the wall, and it played music at a volume that allowed conversation. The kind of bar that felt like it had always been there, that would always be there. That had absorbed the conversations of thousands of nights and held them somewhere. In its walls, the bartender was a woman named Pat who appeared to be somewhere between 55 and 75, with silver hair and a way of setting your glass down in front of you that felt like a small ceremony. 2, Zoe told her. Sliding onto a bar stool, setting Dorothy carefully on the bar where Pat gave the plant a brief, evaluating look and said nothing. Pat set 2 glasses of wine in front of them without being asked and moved away down the bar. She does that, Zoe said, seeing Sarah's expression. She just decides. She decided correctly, Sarah said, tasting hers. They settled into the bar the way they had settled into the elevator gradually, finding the right angle, the right proximity. Except here they were side by side on bar stools and there was wine and the music was something slow and old and the night outside the windows was all city lights and damp dark air. Tell me more about your 11 songs. Zoe said dots, so Sarah told her. She talked about learning piano at 24, which felt late to start. Picking it up because she had always wanted to and finally decided that always wanting something and never doing. It was a kind of small sadness she didn't want to keep carrying. She talked about the teacher she'd found, an older woman named Mrs. Chun, who had the patience of stone and the precision of a surgeon. She talked about the specific joy of finally understanding a piece of music, not just playing the notes but hearing what they were doing. Hearing the shape of it. Zoe listened the way she had listened all evening with her full attention. Not filling the silences, not redirecting to herself. Sarah noticed this. She noticed the quality of Zoe's listening, the way you notice good light. It made you want to say more, to be more honest, to reach for the more precise word. In turn, Zoe talked about Chicago again. About a summer job she'd had at 16 working at a record store, a real record store. Vinyl and everything, where the owner, an old jazz musician named Henry, had given her an education in music that she was still drawing on. She talked about the first time she had heard Nina Simone and how it had done something to her sense of what a voice could be and what it could hold. Have you heard her version of Feeling Good? Zoe asked. Of course. When she sings it, it's not optimism. It's something harder than optimism. Like she's claiming something that was taken from her. Sarah looked at Zoe. Yes, exactly. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. They were facing each other now, turned on their bar stools. The bar moved around them, other people, other conversations. The bartender Pat making her slow, deliberate way along the counter, but their corner of it felt separate, particular, like it had been set aside. What are you afraid of? Zoe asked. Sarah didn't hesitate. Disappearing. Not physically, I mean doing work that doesn't matter. Living a life that doesn't mean anything. Spending all your time on the surface of things. She paused. You? Being too careful. Zoe looked at her wine glass. I can be very good at protecting myself. At seeing something good and finding reasons not to reach for it. I spent my 20s being careful and I think I miss things. She looked up. I'm trying to be less careful now. Sarah held her gaze. Is that what this is? Zoe smiled slowly. This, she said, is me being very, very less careful. The bar around them did its bar things. The music changed, something with a piano now, something gentle and unhurried. Sarah turned back to the bar for a moment, her wine glass in her hand. Not looking at Zoe, but aware of her completely, the warmth of her nearby. The particular energy that a person who is paying attention to you gives off. I want to ask you something, Sarah said. And you said I don't need permission. So I'm just going to ask it. Okay. Would you want to do this again? She looked at her. On purpose. Not because we got stuck somewhere. The smile that came over Zoe's face was slow and certain, and it held. Something that Sarah recognized, the expression of someone who has been hoping to be asked a thing and is happy, finally, to hear it. Yes, Zoe said. Very much yes. Sarah nodded once, seriously, the way she nodded when something was decided. Then she smiled. Good, good. Zoe agreed. Pat appeared and refilled their glasses without comment and disappeared again. They stayed at the bar. Until midnight, they talked about food. Zoe had a thing about cooking. Found it meditative, spent Sunday afternoons making things that required attention and patience. Stews and braises and breads that had to be handled gently. Sarah confessed to being a confident but chaotic cook, someone who improvised freely and sometimes produced something wonderful and sometimes produced something that required a backup plan. You're a jazz cook, Zoe told her. And you're classical, Zoe agreed. I follow the recipe the first time. Then I experiment. They talked about books. Both were readers, the kind who always had something going, who lost track of time inside a good sentence. Zoe liked history, biographies, the kind of narrative nonfiction that made the past feel immediate. Sarah loved fiction, the stranger and more precise the better. The kind of novel that tells you something true about being human through something that never happened. You should read what I read, Zoe said. And I'll read what you read. That sounds like homework. The best kind. At midnight, they left. Pat received their money with the ceremony with which she had given them the wine and wished them good night. Without looking up from the glass she was polishing, on the sidewalk outside, the October night had gotten colder. Their breath was just barely visible. Zoe had Dorothy under one arm and her blazer back on, and Sarah's scarf was wrapped twice around her neck. They stood there. I should find a cab, Sarah said. I'm going to walk. I don't live far. In this cold? I like the cold. Zoe looked at her. I'll sleep well tonight. Sarah looked at her for a moment. The city around them was quiet at this hour. A few cars, a distant siren somewhere, the sound of the wind moving through the last of the October leaves. The moon was still there between the buildings. Saturday, Sarah said. Are you free Saturday? Zoe's expression did the thing it did, that slow, warm opening. I'm free Saturday. There's a farmer's market I go to in the morning. It's small but good. And there's a coffee place nearby that's very good but very crowded and you have to arrive early. She paused. I know you have specific coffee needs. I thought you should know they can handle them. Zoe was smiling. A farmer's market and a coffee shop. And then we can figure out the rest. I'd like that, Zoe said. She looked at Sarah, really looked at her, the way she had been looking at her all evening, with that quality of full presence, of genuine attention. I'd really like that. They exchanged numbers. There was a brief moment where they stood very close, and the night was quiet and cold, and something was waiting to happen, and then Zoe leaned forward and pressed a kiss to Sarah's cheek, slow and deliberate. Not the quick brush of a casual goodbye, but something longer, more intentional. Her lips warm against Sarah's cheek in the cold air. When she pulled back, Sarah was very still. Good night, Sarah Malik, Zoe said. Good night, Zoe Carter. Zoe walked away down the sidewalk. Dorothy tucked under her arm, her blazer collar turned up against the cold. At the corner she turned and looked back, and Sarah was still there. And they looked at each other across the half-block of night between them. And then Zoe turned the corner and was gone. Sarah stood there for a moment. Then she smiled to herself, to the empty sidewalk, to the moon above the buildings, and hailed a cab. Saturday arrived the way good days sometimes do, crisp and clear, and with a quality of light that felt like a gift. Sarah was up early. She told herself it wasn't because of anything in particular and did not believe herself. She wore her favorite jeans and a rust-colored sweater, and she let her hair down. And she did not do anything dramatic about it, because she was not a dramatic person about appearances, but she stood in front of her mirror for a moment longer than usual with a feeling in her chest that was something between excitement and the particular tenderness of something new. Mango watched her from the bed with the expression of a cat who knows everything and is saying nothing. It's just a farmer's market, Sarah told her. Mango blinked. And coffee? Mango turned her head and looked at the window. Sarah picked up her bag and left. Zoe was already there when Sarah arrived. She was standing at the edge of the market wearing a long camel coat and a deep burgundy scarf. And she had a reusable bag on her shoulder, and she was looking at a stall of autumn squash with an expression of genuine interest. She looked up when Sarah came around the corner, and the expression on her face, immediate, unguarded, purely glad, landed somewhere in the center of Sarah's chest and stayed there. "You're early," Sarah said. "I am always early." Zoe fell into step beside her. "I got you something." She produced from her bag a small paper-wrapped thing tied with string. Sarah unwrapped it as they walked. It was a small packet of loose-leaf tea, the label handwritten. "It's from the tea stall over there," Zoe said. "The woman who runs it said it was for people who think too hard late at night. I thought it might be useful." Sarah looked at the label. It said in small, careful handwriting, "For the wakeful mind, chamomile. Lemon balm, a little honey." "Do I seem like someone who thinks too hard late at night?" Sarah asked. "You stayed until 8 on a Thursday working on a project." Zoe glanced at her. I felt a kinship. Sarah put the tea in her bag with care. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. It might taste terrible." "It's the thought." They walked through the market slowly, the way markets are meant to be walked, pausing, doubling back, stopping to look at things without necessarily buying them. Zoe bought 2 bunches of herbs, a jar of honey, and 3 kinds of apple because she said she was making a tart. Sarah bought a loaf of bread and a bunch of chrysanthemums and stood for a long time at a stall of hand-printed cards before choosing one with a drawing of a piano on it. "Who's that for?" Zoe asked. "Myself," Sarah said simply. Zoe looked at the card, then at Sarah, and didn't say anything. But something in her expression was very warm. They got coffee at the place Sarah had mentioned, a small, steamed window. Barely room to stand place without standing coffee, and a single small table pressed against the wall that was, by remarkable luck, empty when they arrived. They installed themselves there with their cups and their market bags and the sounds of the city outside the window. Zoe's coffee order was indeed specific. The young man behind the counter listened to it without blinking and made it exactly right, which seemed to please Zoe deeply. "He didn't even write anything down," she said. Sitting down, "He has that gift. I'm coming here every weekend." Sarah smiled over her cup. "You can come with me." "I come most weekends." The sentence hung in the air, casual, open, an invitation folded into an observation. Zoe received it with a small smile of her own. "Tell me about your week," Zoe said. So Sarah told her. The client had eventually made up his mind, and the final design had turned out well, better than well, actually. The kind of outcome that redeemed all the revision cycles. She had told her sister about Thursday night, and her sister had been entirely too excited about it, texting 4 times in 20 minutes. Each text with a different level of capitalization. What was the highest level of capitalization, Zoe asked. All caps with punctuation. There was an exclamation point. Situation, she sounds wonderful. She's extremely wonderful and also currently my least subtle family member. Sarah shook her head with affection. She said, and I'm quoting, "A plant, Sarah. She brought her plant." Zoe laughed her surprised, genuine laugh. "Dorothy's getting credit. Dorothy started all of this." They looked at each other. The coffee shop moved around them, the steam and the small talk and the sound of the grinder. And they sat in their small corner of it and looked at each other with the particular awareness of two people who are in the early part of something and know it and are not taking it for granted. Zoe told Sarah about her week. The new client pitch had moved forward. There was a follow-up meeting next week. Her mother had called Sunday and the call had gone 47 minutes, 2 minutes over the usual. Because Zoe had told her a little bit about Thursday and her mother had opinions. Good opinions or very good opinions. She said, and I quote, "Someone who stays late to take care of her plant is someone with a good heart." She decided that from Dorothy. My mother decides a lot from small things. She thinks the small things are where the character actually lives. Sarah thought about this. She thought it was probably true. She thought about the small things she had already noticed about Zoe, the way she listened, the way she asked permission before a personal question, the way she had been defensive about Dorothy before she was warm about her, the way she kissed Sarah's cheek in the cold outside the bar with such deliberateness. These were not dramatic gestures. They were small things. And they had built over the course of 2 evenings into something that felt substantial. Your mother sounds wise, Sarah said. She's annoyingly wise, Zoe agreed. It's a lot to live up to. After coffee they walked. No particular destination, just the Saturday city, the cool October air, the market bag on Zoe's shoulder and the chrysanthemums in Sarah's hand. They walked along the river for a while. The trees along the bank were at their peak-colored golds and reds and the particular orange that looks like fire, and the light on the water was silver and moving. They talked about 100 things. They talked about places they wanted to go. Zoe had been to Portugal and described it in a way that made Sarah want to go immediately. Sarah had been to Japan and described it in a way that had the same effect on Zoe. They talked about the projects they most wanted to do. Zoe had an idea for a podcast about small businesses with great origin stories. Sarah wanted to do a series of illustrated prints inspired by cities she'd lived in. You should do that, Zoe said. Seriously? That's a real thing. I've been saying I'll do it for 2 years. What's stopping you? Sarah thought. The same thing that stops most things. Fear that the finished thing won't match the idea. What if it matches it better? Sarah looked at her. That's an unreasonably optimistic thing to say. I'm a marketer. Optimism is a professional tool. But she was smiling. Sarah, you design beautiful things for a living. The series would be beautiful. Sarah looked at the river, at the light on the water, at the golden trees. She felt something shift slightly in how she was holding the idea of the project, a small unlocking. Maybe, she said. Definitely, Zoe said. They walked a bit further. Somewhere along the path, without it being discussed or decided. Zoe's hand had found Sarah's not dramatically. Just her fingers finding Sarah's fingers and staying there, easy and warm. The way two people hold hands when it is already natural and right. Sarah looked down at their joined hands and then back up at the river and felt, in a quiet, complete way, happy. This is a very good Saturday, Zoe said. Probably in the top 10. Sarah agreed. Top 5. Don't push it. Zoe laughed and squeezed her hand. What followed was the particular and wonderful process of two people getting to know each other properly. They went to a small gallery. A friend of Sarah's had a show opening. Photographs of industrial spaces made beautiful through attention and light. They stood in front of a large print of an empty factory floor where the afternoon sun came through high windows and shafts, and said both their different things about it. And then discovered their different things were pointing at the same thing. Zoe came over for dinner on a Wednesday. Sarah cooked her version of biryani, the one her mother had taught her. The one she made well but always slightly differently. And Zoe sat on the kitchen counter and asked questions and tasted things when offered, and managed the spice level with impressive composure for someone who had admitted to a low spice threshold. Mango inspected Zoe from a distance for 20 minutes, then walked directly up to her and sat on her foot, which Sarah told her was the highest possible honor. She sat on my foot, Zoe said, looking down at the cat with an expression of pure gratitude. She has never sat on anyone's foot that fast. Dorothy would want to know about this. Sarah cooked the biryani and they ate it at the small table by the window, and they talked until midnight. And when Zoe left, she stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at Sarah in that way she had, direct and warm and completely unhurried. and then kissed her. Not on the cheek this time. It was gentle and deliberate and unhurried, like Zoe herself. And Sarah's hand found the lapel of Zoe's coat and held it. And for a moment the hallway outside Sarah's apartment was the whole world. "Good night," Zoe said against her lips. "Come back Thursday." Sarah said, "I'll come back Thursday." She came back Thursday. And the Thursday after that, they found each other's rhythms, Zoe's precision and Sarah's improvisation, which in practice complemented each other beautifully. Sarah would have an idea. Zoe would figure out how to make it real. Zoe would have a plan. Sarah would find the beautiful, slightly oblique angle into it. In the coffee shop with the good barista, which had become their place without being formally decided, they sat at their small table and talked about everything, and Zoe took her specific coffee seriously and Sarah took her tea from the farmer's market, and they were, in those hours, completely comfortable and completely alive at the same time. This, Sarah knew, was rare. She told her sister on a Sunday phone call. It's easy," she said, sitting on her couch with mango in her lap. Not in a boring way. In the way that feels like putting something down that you've been carrying. Like you can just breathe. Her sister was quiet for a moment. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she said. "About someone." "You have not been waiting, Sarah. I've been waiting for years for you to tell me about someone who makes you feel like you can breathe." Her voice was soft and certain. "I'm very happy." Sarah looked at Mango. She thought about Zoe, about her laugh, about the way she held Dorothy, about the gap between her front teeth and the quality of her attention and the deliberateness of every kind thing she did. "Unhappy too," she said. 6 weeks after the elevator. Zoe was at Sarah's apartment on a Saturday afternoon. She had brought groceries. She was making the apple tart she had mentioned at the farmer's market, the recipe from her mother, the one that required attention and patience. Sarah was at her piano working through a piece she'd been learning. A Chopin nocturne that kept getting away from her in the middle section. The apartment was full of good things, the smell of pastry, the sounds of the piano, the low afternoon light through the windows. Mango's occasional comment from the WINDOWSILL. Zoe appeared in the doorway of the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel, watching Sarah work. Sarah played the passage again. "Got it. Lost it on the next bar." Sighed. "You almost had it," Zoe said. "I know. Play it slower." Sarah looked at her. "I'm serious." "Play it at half speed." Sarah played it at half speed. At half speed, the notes made more sense. At half speed, she could feel where her hands needed to go, could read the shape of the phrase. Again, Zoe said. She played it again. And again. The third time, slightly faster. The fourth time, faster still. The fifth time. She got through it. She sat there for a moment, hands on the keys, feeling the satisfaction settle. Then she turned around. Zoe was leaning in the doorway with a dish towel and an expression of such simple, uncomplicated pleasure at Sarah's success, at the music, at being here, that Sarah felt it like a warmth against her skin. "You got it," Zoe said. "You talked me through it. You did it." She pushed off the doorway. "Tart needs another 20 minutes. Come sit with me while I wait." They sat in the kitchen while the tart baked. Sarah on the counter where Zoe had sat during the biryani dinner. Zoe leaning against the opposite counter. The kitchen was warm and smelled of apples and butter and cinnamon. Outside the window, the November sky was the color of pewter, and the city below was settling into its afternoon. "I want to tell you something," Zoe said. Sarah looked at her. Zoe was looking at the oven, not at Sarah. Her hands were folded in front of her, the dish towel over her shoulder. She had the posture of someone choosing words carefully. "I have been," she said, "very lucky in my life. My mother is extraordinary. I've had good friendships. I've had work that matters to me." A pause. "And I have also been for a long time a little bit lonely. In the way where you can be surrounded by people and still feel like there's something missing. A particular kind of company that I didn't have." She looked at Sarah now. "I want you to know that you have that since the elevator. I don't feel that way." Sarah was very still. "I know it's been 6 weeks, Zoe said. "I know that's not long. I'm not trying to make it into something it's not yet. I'm just telling you what's true." She held Sarah's gaze. "What's true is that you're the best thing in my days right now. And I wanted you to know that. The kitchen was quiet except for the faint sound of the oven and the city outside. Sarah got down from the counter. She crossed the kitchen to Zoe and stood in front of her and looked at her for a moment. At this person she'd only known for 6 weeks and already felt she could not remember not knowing. And then she put her arms around her and Zoe's arms came around her. And they stood there in the warm kitchen holding each other while the tart finished baking. I feel the same way, Sarah said into the warmth of Zoe's shoulder. I feel exactly the same way. Zoe tightened her arms. They stood there for a long time. Winter came. The city put on its gray coat and its string lights and its cold pavement smell. Sarah and Zoe put on theirs. There was a Sunday morning ritual, now one of them at the other's apartment. Coffee from the good place, the farmer's market if it wasn't too cold. And then the long easy afternoon that Sundays are for. Zoe's apartment, it turned out, was full of books and plants, and excellent light. Dorothy had been joined by 2 more plants. A spider plant named Ella, after Ella Fitzgerald, and a small cactus named Miles. Zoe talked to all of them. Sarah stopped being surprised by this. They met each other's people. Sarah's sister, the one who had sent the all-caps text, met Zoe over dinner and spent the entire meal being so transparently delighted that Sarah had to kick her under the table twice. Afterward, her sister pulled her into the kitchen and said, in an urgent whisper, Sarah, she's wonderful. She's wonderful, with an emphasis that somehow covered the whole person in one word, Zoe's. Mother met Sarah over a video call one Sunday, present for the last 10 minutes of the weekly walk call because Zoe wanted Sarah to know her and wanted her mother to know Sarah, Mrs. Carter, calling from Chicago, walking in the cold with her phone. Looked at Sarah through the screen with bright, assessing eyes. Sarah Malik, she said. Zoe has told me about you. She's told me a lot about you too. Mrs. Carter smiled. She says you're a designer. I am. She says you play piano. Badly but enthusiastically. Mrs. Carter glanced at her daughter, who was walking beside her and trying to look calm. And she says you're kind. A brief pause. That's the thing she said first, Mrs. Carter continued. Not that you were talented or beautiful, though I suspect you're both. She said you were kind. That's the one that matters. Zoe was looking at the sidewalk with an expression that suggested she was regretting letting this call happen. She's kind too. Sarah said. Mrs. Carter looked back at the screen. I know, she said. I raised her. She smiled again, a smile that explained where Zoe's smile came from. I'm glad to meet you, Sarah. I'm very glad to meet you too. They walked through winter together, through December and its complications, through January and its long cold gray. There were disagreements because any 2 real people with real minds will have them. There was a night when something Sarah said landed wrong and Zoe went quiet in a way that was not her usual comfortable quiet. And Sarah had to ask gently what was wrong. And Zoe had to explain patiently what it was that had stung. And then Sarah had to sit with that and understand it instead of defending herself. And she did. And Zoe watched her do it. There was a week in January when Zoe's work became very pressured, a pitch that consumed her. Late nights, short attention, and Sarah had to resist the pull to take it personally. To see the distance as something about her rather than about the work. She was not always successful at this. One evening she said something a little sharp and Zoe looked at her and said quietly, I know I've been absent. I'm sorry. I'm going to come back. And Sarah had believed her. And Zoe had come back. This is what love actually looks like, Sarah thought. Not the early weeks, as extraordinary as those were. The learning how to miss each other without punishing each other for it. The learning that a disagreement is not the end, that a hard week is not a sign. That 2 different people will need different things at different times, and the work is in the willingness to keep finding each other across those differences. She thought about this one evening in February. Sitting at her piano, Mango beside her. She was looking at the card she had bought at the farmer's market, the one with the piano on it. The one she had bought for herself, which was now on the piano, beside a small framed photograph of her and Zoe at the river in October. The Golden Tree Day, both of them laughing at something out of frame. She played the Chapin Nocturne all the way through. Without stopping. Spring. Sarah single quotes as sister called her on a Tuesday evening in March during the walk home from the subway. And Sarah answered with her bag over one shoulder and her scarf getting loose in the March wind. Okay, her sister said. Tell me everything. Hello to you too. Sarah, it's been 5 months. I need an update. Is this the one? Sarah walked a block in the softening spring air. The trees on her street were still bare, but you could feel the green coming back, particular aliveness that the earth gets before it visibly changes. She thought about Zoe. She thought about the specific inventory of things she now knew about her, the Sunday calls, the crying at commercials, the way she talked to her plants, the way she listened, the way she chose every kind gesture with intention, the way she had said, I don't feel lonely anymore in the kitchen, while the tart-baked dot she thought about the piano nocturne. Sarah? Her sister said. I think so, Sarah said. Yeah, I think so. Her sister made a sound of pure satisfaction. I knew from the farmer's market story. I said to Reyes, I said, this is the one, and Reyes said, please don't tell me what Reyes said. He said you sounded different when you talked about her. He said you sounded settled. Sarah stopped at the corner. She thought about being settled. Not settled as in giving up. Settled as in arrived. As in, this is where I am, and where I am is good. Yeah, she said again. I do. April, 6 months after the elevator. Zoe had suggested it returning to the Harrington building on the 6-month mark, a private ceremony for 2 people and 1 plant. She had framed it with her slight self-consciousness about sentimentality, the way she always did, making a small joke before saying the real thing. I know it's slightly absurd, she'd said. It's entirely absurd, Sarah told her. I love it. So on a Thursday evening in late April, almost exactly 6 months after they'd gotten stuck, they stood in the lobby of the Harrington building. Zoe had Dorothy. Sarah had her thermos, now refilled with actual hot coffee. The lobby was the same, the slightly yellow evening lighting. The older elevator with its polished metal doors, they stood in front of it. Are we going to get in? Sarah asked. Zoe looked at the elevator. I think we have to. They pressed the button. The doors opened. They stepped inside. The elevator was the same slightly groaning start, same faint smell of metal and cleaning product. Sarah pressed the button for the 7th floor. The doors slid closed. They stood there. There is a kind of love that announces itself loudly, grand gestures, dramatic declarations, the kind of thing that makes for good stories told at parties. And then there is the other kind, the kind that reveals itself in the accumulation of small things. The way a mosaic reveals itself when you step back individual pieces that seem unremarkable up close, but together make something undeniable. Sarah and Zoe were learning the second kind. It was a Tuesday in May when Sarah first understood how deep the roots had gone. She was at her desk, deep in a project, a rebrand for a small publishing house that had given her complete creative freedom, which was both the best and most terrifying kind of brief. She had 4 open tabs, 3 coffee cups in various states of emptiness, and a sketchbook covered in handwritten notes and rough thumbnail drawings. She was in that particular zone that designers sometimes reach, where the outside world dims and the problem in front of you becomes the only real thing. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She reached for it without looking up, intending to flip it face down, and caught the name on the screen, Zoe. She looked at the message. I'm getting lunch from that Thai place. The one with the green curry you liked. Want me to grab you something? Sarah stared at the message for a moment. It was such a small thing. Lunch, a text. The kind of thing that gets sent and received 100 times between 2 people, and rarely remembered. But Sarah sat very still with her phone, and felt something move through her, a wave of something warm and enormous, completely out of proportion to a text about green curry. It was not the gesture itself. It was what the gesture contained. It was the knowledge tucked inside the casual words that Zoe had been at a Thai restaurant thinking about what Sarah liked. That in the middle of Zoe's own day and her own hunger, Sarah had been present. Not dramatically. Not consciously, probably. Just there. The way people you love are always slightly present in you, even when you're doing something else entirely. She typed back, yes, please. The green curry. Extra rice if they'll do it. Then she put her phone down, looked at her sketchbook, and smiled without meaning to. Her colleague James, sitting at the next desk, looked up. Good news? Green curry, Sarah said. James nodded as if this explained everything. Which somehow it did. Zoe showed up at the 7th floor at 12:30 with 2 paper bags and an expression of someone who had navigated the lunch rush with strategic competence. I got here before the elevator line, she said, setting the bags on Sarah's desk and looking around the design floor with the mild curiosity she always brought to spaces that weren't her own. The design floor was more colorful than the 10th floor printed mood boards, color swatches pinned to the walls. A large whiteboard covered in what looked to outsiders like beautiful chaos. You took the stairs? Sarah asked, opening the bag. Obviously. Zoe sat in the empty chair beside Sarah's desk, James's chair. Borrowed without ceremony, which James had quietly accepted as a standing arrangement on days Zoe visited. I printed something for a client this morning and the 10th floor printer jammed and I had to come down to 4 to print it. And the elevator was full and slow and I thought. She paused. Life is short. Sarah handed her the spring rolls. Life is short, she agreed. They ate at Sarah's desk. This was a thing they had discovered about themselves, that they could share a meal in almost any context and it would feel like enough. The settings were just settings. In Sarah's apartment, in Zoe's apartment, at the bar Pat ran with her slow ceremony, at the small table in the coffee shop, at Sarah's desk surrounded by printing samples and color swatches. The meal was not the point. The being together was the point. Zoe looked at the sketchbook. Can I? Yeah, Zoe turned a few pages slowly, studying the thumbnails. Sarah watched her look. She always felt slightly exposed when Zoe looked at her work, not insecure about the quality, but vulnerable in the way you feel when someone looks at the inside of your thinking, the rough version. Before you've made it presentable. Zoe looked for a long moment at one page, a rough sketch of a logo concept. A stylized open book with a small bird coming out of the pages. This one, she said quietly. Yeah? This is it. This is the one. Sarah looked at the sketch. She'd felt it too, the moment it had come out of her pencil, that particular recognition of the right idea. But she had been second-guessing it, the way she always second-guessed the things that felt most right, you think? Zoe looked at her. Sarah, the book is opening and something is flying out of it. It's literally what publishing is, something released into the world. It's obvious and beautiful and exactly right. Sarah looked at the sketch again. She felt the second-guessing loosen its grip. You're a very good person to have around, she said. I know, Zoe said, entirely without arrogance, just factually eating her spring roll. Eat your curry before it gets cold. The summer was the easiest season they'd had, warm and long and generous with light. They went away for a weekend in July, a small rented house near the coast that belonged to a friend of Zoe's who had offered it. It was a 2-hour drive, and they drove with the windows down and Zoe's playlist, which was curated with the same specific attention she brought to everything, and they stopped once for gas and once because they passed a farm stand that was too good to drive. Past. Sarah bought peaches. She stood at the farm stand in the July sun and held a peach in both hands and squeezed it very gently, testing for ripeness. And when she turned around, Zoe was watching her with an expression so full of something that Sarah almost dropped the peach. What? Sarah said. Nothing, Zoe said. But she was smiling. You're looking at me like what? Sarah thought about it. Like the first time we talked about it. The peach in the lobby. Zoe came and stood beside her at the farm stand. She took one of the peaches from Sarah's hands and turned it over carefully. April, she said quietly. You were standing in the lobby and you were eating a peach and you looked like the world had given you something it owed you. She glanced sideways. I thought about that for weeks. You never told me that part. I told you I noticed you? You said I was focused on the peach. You were very focused on the peach. She set the peach in the basket Sarah was holding. Turns out peaches are extremely relevant to my life. Sarah looked at her. The farm stand was busy around them, a family with 2 small children negotiating about corn, an older couple choosing tomatoes, and the July sun was warm on their shoulders. And the air smelled like fresh-cut grass and ripe fruit. And Sarah put her free hand on the back of Zoe's neck, just briefly, just a touch. The way you touch someone you know well and love and want to acknowledge. Zoe leaned into it. Just slightly. They bought the peaches and 6 ears of corn and a jar of local honey and got back in the car and drove to the coast. With the windows down, the house near the coast was small and white and sat back from a path that led down to the water. It had a porch with 2 wooden chairs and a kitchen, with bright yellow walls and a bedroom with a window that let in the sound of the sea. They stayed 2 nights on. The first evening they cooked the corn on the old gas stove and ate it on the porch with butter and salt and the peaches for dessert. And the sun went down in a long theatrical display of orange and gold over the water. And they sat in the wooden chairs and watched it the way you watch something that you know is nearly over and want to keep. My mother would love this porch, Zoe said. Bring her some time. Zoe looked at her. She would like you, she said. In person. She liked you on the call, but she'd like you more in person. I'd like that. Sarah turned the peach pit in her hand. I want to meet her properly. She wants to meet you properly, too. A pause. She mentioned it last Sunday, casually, in the way she mentions things she's actually very interested in by making them sound extremely casual. Sarah smiled. She wants to vet me. She wants to love you, Zoe said. There's a difference. The sea made its steady sound below them. The last of the light faded. The stars began slowly at first, then all at once. The sky deepening from gray to ink and the stars appearing the way they do when you're away from the city. Not a few bright ones, but thousands. The whole sprawling, ridiculous abundance of them. Sarah tipped her head back in her chair. I forget, she said. How many there are? Zoe had done the same thing, tipped her head back, looking up. Their chairs were close enough that their arms were touching on the shared armrest. My grandmother knew the constellations, Sarah said. In Lahore, when I was small, she would take me to the roof in summer and point them out. She knew all the Arabic names. She paused. I've forgotten most of them. Tell me the ones you remember. So Sarah told her the few she remembered, the stories inside them, the Arabic names that sounded in her mouth like something from a long time ago. Zoe listened in the dark with the sea below them, and asked questions, and when Sarah ran out of constellations, they were quiet together under the full, remarkable sky. I'm going to learn them, Zoe said eventually. The Arabic names. Sarah looked at her in the dark. Why? Because they're yours. Simply, without any drama. I want to know the things that are yours. Sarah said nothing for a long moment. She just held that. Let it be what it was. Zoe, she said. Yeah, I love you. The sea moved. The stars were everywhere above them. Zoe turned her head. In the low light from the kitchen window, her face was soft and sure and looking at Sarah with everything in it. I love you too, she said. I have for a while. I was waiting until it felt right to say it. When did it start feeling right? Zoe considered this seriously, as she considered most things. Tuesday, she said. When I texted you about the green curry and you said yes please and extra rice. She paused. Something about the extra rice. Sarah stared at her. I know, Zoe said. It's not a very romantic answer. It's the most romantic answer, Sarah said. They sat under their stars and the sea made its old continuous sound and the night around them was warm and complete. October came back. 1 year mark. The city put on its best color. For the occasion, the streets golden red and the particular orange that looks like fire, which is what it had been on the river walk in that first October. The same color returning like a kept promise. Sarah had been thinking, in the weeks leading up to it, about the nature of anniversaries. Not the formal kind. They had not declared an anniversary, had not circled a date on a calendar, but the felt kind. The knowledge, sitting quietly in the body, that a year had passed. That a year ago the elevator in the Harrington building had stopped between the 6th and 7th floors and 2 women had sat on the floor with a plant between them and started something. A year of Sundays. A year of the farmer's market and the coffee shop and Pat's bar and Sarah's piano and Zoe's kitchen and the coast house and the constellation roof. A year of disagreements resolved and silences navigated. And the 100 small daily calibrations that 2 people make when they are making a life that includes each other. A year of Zoe. Sarah sat at her piano on a Thursday evening and played the Chopin nocturne from beginning to end without stopping. And it was not perfect. There were 2 stumbles in the second section. One note in the coda that landed slightly wrong, but it was whole. And she let it be whole, and when it ended, she sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt the shape of the year around her like something she could hold. Mango jumped onto the bench beside her and sat with her chin raised in the manner of a critic who has heard better but will not say so at this time. I know, Sarah told her. Mango closed her eyes. On the evening of their 1-year mark, the real one, the October Thursday, Sarah came home from work to find a note slipped under her apartment door. It was on a plain card. Zoe's handwriting, which was extremely neat because of course it was. Meet me somewhere you know. Dress for the cold. Bring your thermos. Sarah stood in her doorway and read this twice and felt the particular feeling that Zoe reliably produced in her, warmth in the chest. A sense of being delightedly known. She filled the thermos with coffee. She put on her warmest coat and the scarf that Zoe's mother had sent from Chicago at Christmas, deep green wool. Because Mrs. Carter had asked Sarah her favorite color on the video call and apparently taken notes. She let her hair down. She looked at herself in the mirror with the same extra moment she had given herself a year ago on the first Saturday, and the feeling was the same but more settled, more certain. Like coming home to a place you've been coming home to long enough that you stop noticing the drive and just feel the arrival. She left the apartment, the river path, that's where she was. That's where she had known she would be. The October trees were at their peak, the same golds and reds, the same fire orange, the same silver light on the water. It was early evening, just the beginning of dark. The sky a deep tender blue above the color of the trees. Zoe was standing at the place where they had first walked together a year ago, where, without deciding to, their hands had found each other. She was wearing her long camel coat and the burgundy scarf, and she had Dorothy under her arm, which was so completely like her that Sarah stopped walking for a moment just to look at the picture of it. Zoe saw her and smiled. Sarah walked to her. You brought Dorothy, Sarah said. She was there for the beginning, Zoe said. She should be here for this. For what? Zoe shifted Dorothy to her other arm and looked at Sarah in the October light with those direct, present eyes that had been looking at Sarah with full attention for a year now and had not once made her feel anything except completely seen. I have been thinking, Zoe said, about what I want to say, and I've decided to just say it without a script, which is frightening because I'm better with a script. You're fine without one? Sarah said. You're always fine. Zoe took a breath. A year ago, I was in an elevator with a plant and a granola bar and a woman I'd been not quite noticing for 6 months. And I thought I was just going home. I thought it was just a Thursday. She looked at the river, then back at Sarah. It was the opposite of just a Thursday. The trees held their color around them. The water moved. You are the best thing in my days, Zoe said. You've been the best thing in my days since approximately the granola bar. You're the person I call when something good happens and also when something bad happens. You're the person I cook for and the person I want to read what I'm reading and the person whose 11 piano songs I have listened to so many times I could probably play them myself. She paused. Not well, but I know them. Sarah's eyes were warm. She was not going to cry. She was not a crier, but there was something very close to it happening in her chest. I love you, Zoe said. I loved you on the farm stand in July over the peaches. And I love you on Tuesday mornings when you send me a picture of your coffee before you've even said good morning. And I love you when you push your glasses up your nose when you're thinking hard. And I love you when you play the nocturne badly and beautifully and keep going anyway. She held Sarah's gaze. I want more years. I want the next October and the one after that. I want Dorothy to watch us figure out what we're building. She tilted her head. That's what I wanted to say. Silence, or not silence the river. The wind and the gold leaves, the city around them. The world doing its ordinary business while 2 people stood in the middle of it and held the whole year between them. Sarah reached up and touched Zoe's face, her jaw, her cheek, the place just under her ear, the way you touch someone when words are not the best tool. You said you were bad without a script, Sarah said. I know. I surprised myself. You said Dorothy should be here for this. Sarah glanced at the plant. What is this specifically? Zoe held her gaze. The October light was on her face, the same light that had been on the river that first Saturday, the same gold. The beginning of the next part, she said. Whatever we want it to be. Sarah looked at her for a long moment. She thought about the elevator, the granola bar, the 6 floors of descent that had turned into everything else. She thought about Dorothy in her corner of the elevator, growing toward whatever light she could find. She thought about what Zoe had said on that first night. There's something admirable about that dot growing toward the light. She kissed Zoe, standing on the river path, under the October trees with the gold leaves coming down around them, and Dorothy tucked under Zoe's arm in the thermos of coffee warm in Sarah's hand. She kissed her the way you kiss someone when you know them and love them and mean it, and Zoe kissed her back the same way. And the river moved beside them, and the trees held their color, and the city went on around them. Ordinary and extraordinary at once, the way cities are, the way life is when you are paying attention, when they broke apart. Zoe pressed her forehead to Sarah's. Next October, Sarah said quietly, and the one after that, and the one after that. They stood together in the October evening, breathing the same cold air. Dorothy, serene in her corner of the world, was already turning toward the last of the light. Some things are certain. The elevator in the Harrington building has been repaired. It runs smoothly now. Dorothy the peace lily has grown 3 new leaves since October. Mrs. Carter is planning a visit in the spring. There is a piano in Sarah's apartment. It is played badly and beautifully and without stopping. The farmer's market runs through November this year. The stars have Arabic names that 2 women are learning together, and somewhere between the 6th and 7th floor of an old building, in a city full of almost meetings and near conversations, something chose not to be almost. It just was. It just is. There is a photograph on Sarah's desk at the office 7th floor, the design department, in a small frame beside her monitor. In the photograph, 2 women are standing in the lobby of a building. One of them is holding a plant. They are both laughing at something out of frame, completely comfortable, completely at ease. The evening light through the lobby windows is warm and golden. Anyone who works in the building would recognize the lobby. Anyone who knows the story would recognize the plant. Sarah looks at this photograph, sometimes between projects, in the small breathing spaces of the day. She looks at Zoe laughing in it, and at herself laughing, and at Dorothy held under Zoe's arm, serene and unconcerned. The elevator in the Harrington building has been repaired since then. It runs smoothly now, no groaning, no shuddering, no stops between floors. The building manager finally got the maintenance done. Sarah has mixed feelings about this. Some people believe in fate. Some don't. Sarah is somewhere in between. She thinks the universe is probably not running a matchmaking service, that the elevator breaking was a mechanical failure and not a cosmic intervention. But she also thinks that sometimes the circumstances of a moment open a door that wouldn't have opened otherwise, and that what matters is whether you step through it. She thinks about Zoe standing on the other side of the elevator doors that October evening holding her plant, slightly defensive about it, looking at Sarah with those direct, present eyes. She thinks about stepping through. She picks up her pencil and goes back to work on the windowsill of the 10th floor marketing office. Dorothy the peace lily stands in the afternoon light. She's grown considerably since October. She has new leaves, broad and green, and leaning toward the window with the particular patience of something alive that knows what it needs and moves toward it, growing toward the light. There is something admirable about that.